Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Dan Hanford, one of the managing partners at PassiveInvesting.com. And with us today is Angel Williams. Angel, welcome to the podcast.
Oh man, thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to diving into this acquisition. I believe you guys closed this at the end of last year. Is that correct?
Yes, December 17th of 21.
Okay, December of 2021. It's a 72 unit asset called 1000 Mary Apartment Homes located in Wichita Falls, Texas. Before we dive into this acquisition, why don't you share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of where you are right now on the multifamily side of things?
All right, absolutely. So we come from residential. We're still in residential. We've been doing it for about 20 years. My husband and I both grew up in families that invested in residential real estate. So it's just it's a really easy jam because we've been doing it for so long. We got into multifamily about 2017 as LPs. At that point in time, Jason was working his W-2 as a chemical engineer, and I was working as an adjunct college instructor and a middle school teacher. So that's kind of where we came from. I quit teaching middle school in 2020, and Jason no longer is a W-2 employee as of June 30th. So now he is strictly contract and consulting.
Awesome. That's exciting. So he's still going to do some work on the side, but it'll be doing more on the real estate than having to go into a job and kind of clicking the time clock, if you will.
Yeah. I think he's contracted for like 20 hours a month or something.
Okay. So, well, that'll be good. That's great. I'm glad to see you guys make that transition. I know you and I have, and your husband we've all known each other for several years now. And it's been exciting to kind of see you guys kind of grow as well. And well, let's go ahead and dive right into this asset here. How did you guys initially kind of become aware of this particular asset?
Okay. So Jason also has an underwriting review business, and someone brought it to him. Gosh, I guess maybe March of 21, maybe before that, it might've been 2020. And they brought it to him to check the underwriting. And when Jason did the underwriting, the numbers just didn't work. And so we told the person, and that person just kind of ghosted. They just kind of disappeared. And I was literally sitting in my driveway in my vehicle, and I get this SMS blast, and I look at it. I'm like, oh, these apartments are here in Wichita Falls. And I was like, I've never called a broker. Why not? So I called in the driveway in my car, and the guy that answered didn't know he had answered. He was in his car, and his earbuds were like around his neck. And I'm like, hello. And he was like, oh my God, I didn't know anybody was on the phone. I'm like, well, yeah, I just got this text that said, you're looking at, or you're looking for a buyer for Shepherd's Edge and for Thousand Mary. I was like, and those are in my hometown. This is where I live. He's like, oh, okay. And so we talked a little bit, and he penciled us in for a 12 o'clock showing, because I was like, Jason can get there. That's his lunchtime. And I told him, I'll call you back if it doesn't work out. Completely and totally informal. Absolutely not what they tell you to do. But it worked. And when we toured it, there was a junior broker and senior broker, because the guy that I had talked to was kind of just getting started. And we wound up becoming pretty good friends with the senior broker on the deal, because I had taken our Jeep up there, and he was like, whose Jeep is this? And I was like, well, it's ours. He's like, oh, do you like to get dirty? And I was like, we like to off-road. But a few weeks later, we actually
sounds like Jeep talk.
Yeah. A few weeks later, we actually went off-roading with him and a friend. And so that was really pretty neat. But that was kind of the way we got into it. And then an LOI went in with a couple of other guys. And before things went through, we kind of realized that we probably weren't going to work out as a team. And I remember calling up Joe, or we emailed Joe, I forget. And Joe was like, well, number one, kudos for recognizing this before you signed anything. And so I felt really good about that. But we wound up, there were some other people that were like, no, we'd love to do this with you. And so another LOI went in, and we made best and final, and we got to the interview, and I wasn't sure. But again, I don't know exactly how to be like formal and PC and all of those things. And so I just remember kind of at the end of it, talking a little bit about my son and the goals that we have to create a foundation for him. And all of a sudden the seller talked a little bit more to us. It's like, oh, and so I don't know what magic happened, or maybe it was just, we were in the right place at the right time on the right phone call.
Mm-hmm.
but we wound up being awarded the deal, and things got interesting from there as well.
So what was the initial kind of submission as far as the offer on that particular set of offers, I guess, if you will?
So we had 100,000. We were putting in 100,000 hard day one.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually don't remember exactly the amount on it. I just remember the 100,000 hard because when we had so many GP changes, I mean, Jason came home from work one day and he was just distraught because we were about to lose $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into that part of the story too, because I know that makes it definitely an exciting story when you have $100,000 on the line there on a property like this. What was the final purchase price on this one?
5
million.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see here. So, and can you walk me through a little bit about what the kind of business plan is or was on this particular property, or however you want to say it? What is the business plan on this property, kind of from a interior, exterior, rents, things like that?
So when I think about when we looked at it, when we walked through it, to me, it was practically turnkey. So when I say like we come from residential side, like we'll buy 322s, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, and they need minor things. They might need like walls painted, and a few, maybe some hardware changes, maybe lighting changes. And these apartments to me were basically turnkey. I think that there was like maybe 10 units left that needed to be upgraded.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. They're really nice. And the community itself is really nice. There were some trees. We had the big freeze in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were some trees that needed to be taken down. And I looked and I was like, oh, that's not gonna be that big of a deal. It was like 18 trees along with some other stuff. So it was a $40,000 deal. When things happen on multifamily, it's way bigger than you're used to. And so we had that kind of stuff. And then we've been doing some exterior changes. We wanted to add some covered parking because that's one of the beauties about living so close to the property. We know what the hill is like here.
Mm-hmm.
We have hill claims every year or two. People get new roofs here all the time because like when people think hail, they're like, oh, little hail. Nah, out of those apartments, it can be like tennis ball sized.
Mm.
And so I wanted to put covered parking out there because what is your resident's usually most expensive asset? Their car. And so I want to be able to protect their cars, and it gets us another income stream.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do that. There was a few changes we were making here and there. And then we've had some fires come up where like we had to make railing changes on the staircases. And so now we're going to do some paint changes, but those weren't in the original schedule of CapEx.
So from the overall CapEx perspective, how much has been allocated towards that?
Maybe we've gotten through about maybe 50,000 of it.
I know, but what's the overall amount that you guys allocated towards the budget for CapEx?
I'm thinking it was 400.
Okay, so right at
but I could be
400.
wrong because I'm thinking it was either 400 or 650,000.
Okay, so for the 400 would leave us right at about $5,500 a unit in renovations. That sounds
That's
about
probably
right.
closer then. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what was the current in place rents?
We've bumped like 50 to 100 a unit.
Mm-hmm.
So they were probably sitting between 7 and 850, and now we're probably like 775 to 925 ish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
and that was with doing fairly little as far as renovations because most of them were already done, right?
yeah, it really was. It was more just trying to get the maintenance things taken care of faster and doing our best to make the property look really nice. It already had an amazing community feel to it. And with the exteriors basically all having been done, our biggest changes were to the exteriors. We wanted to do some changes to the dog parks, looking at some changes to the playground. I want to add vending machines in the laundry room, not like candy and Coke, but like laundry detergent, dryer sheets, and not to make a profit on, but just ease, to make it easier on the residents. And And so it was more of just a customer retention kind of thing,
Mhm.
because I come from the retail world too. And I'm like, I want people to repeat. I want people to stay with us because turnovers they're expensive.
Yeah, they definitely are. Um, so we got the deal under contract at this point. We've put up $100,000 of hard earnest money deposit. And for those of you who are listening that might not understand what that means, we're not talking about a hard money loan. That's not what we're talking about here. It's a totally different topic. We're talking about earnest money deposit that has become non-refundable from day one of signing the PSA. So Angel and her husband wiring out $100,000 of their own hard-earned money to basically say, yes, this is how confident we are that we will do whatever it takes to be able to close this deal and get it through the finish line. So that's basically earnest money deposit, but if you don't execute, you don't get it back. So that's kind of the stressor of this particular transaction. But it's definitely one of those things that you have to put into place to be able to kind of stand out from the crowd. And I'm sure you've probably seen that in that market as well.
Yeah. And we probably could have put up less, but I mean, again, we didn't know. You don't know
Mhm.
what you don't know. And as we were going through it, I remember the story of you putting up $1 million in earnest.
Mhm.
And I told Jason, I'm like, holy crap, if this is what it feels like at 100,000, can you imagine what it would feel like at $1 million?
Yeah. No, I definitely know what the stress feels like for sure.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was rough. And when Jason came home that day, it was after the second team had imploded because
Yeah.
there was a lot of rocky stuff going on. Turns out that if it's a $10 million loan or greater, it's really pretty easy. If it's under 10 million, it's a little harder. Under 5 million, wow. And we were 4.2
Hmm.
on the loan part of it. And so we were a small balance loan in a very small market.
Hmm.
And it was the end of the year. And even though nobody really said it, I think the bucket was empty. And to this day, nobody has said that to me, but I can't think of any other explanation as to why why they kept adding hoops that we had to jump through. But all the hoops we jumped through, it still wasn't enough.
Hmm.
And so it was that day when Jason came home, we made a list of like 35 people of who we could call that had, the knowledge, the experience, and the financial wherewithal to really help us out. And it was call 16 that actually took the time to help us find a loan product.
Hmm. Well, I will say that we in our portfolio, we have acquired three assets that are in that range. Where one of them was 4.4 million, one of them was 3.3 million, and the other one was 8.9 million. And those three definitely cured us of wanting to do any more that are that small. So I definitely can feel, can understand, and can feel right where you are. So definitely. Definitely kudos to you for getting across the finish line for sure. I know it wasn't very easy. So
No.
talk to us a little bit about I know I really want to jump into the investor side and the due diligence side and stuff, not the due diligence, but the finance side of things. I'm holding back because I do have a
Okay.
little bit of background knowledge on this and some of the challenges that you went through, but I don't want to give it away just yet. So I'll just tease it up for those of you who are listening to be able to stay on with this. But during the due diligence process, primarily from a physical and a a financial due diligence, what did you guys find on this property? Was it properly presented the way you thought it was going to be from a financial perspective? And was there anything that came up from from a physical perspective?
So everything really it was pretty good. The I did like the financial audit part of it, or I sat next to the guy that did it all. Um, I nicknamed him Mensa because that was insane. And I was like, oh my God, this sucks. I can't believe you do this all the time.
Great encouragement there, Angel.
I know. I felt bad, but then he started laughing because I was calling him Mensa because the thought that came to mind was on Sneakers, the old movie. The guy had like 180 IQ on his license plate, and to be in Mensa, you have to be super smart. And this guy was super smart, and so there was a whole backstory to it. But I did that, and my husband and another team were working the due diligence side of things. And the guy that was supposed to come and do our foundation and roofing stuff, he walked into a unit. Well, the guy works the guy works nights and didn't get his messages that we were going to be doing due diligence.
Hmm.
And so he goes after this guy and he's like, get out of my effing apartment. And most of my friends are residential, right? And so this guy runs to his door. He's like, I'm not getting shot today. And the next thing I see is this my friend's truck driving down the street. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm trying to call him. He won't pick up. And finally, Jason comes in and tells me about what happened. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. And so I'm like trying to find a foundation person, trying to find a foundation person. And I just didn't have enough people on my list for that. And then when the plumbers came out, there was potentially 2 drain line issues. But we looked at how much it had cost because they had replumbed a building, I guess in 2018, I think. And so we were able to kind of guesstimate if we had to do that, how much it was going to cost. And so we had that kind of in the plans. We have not actually had to replace them yet. We didn't know something was going to happen with the pool because we couldn't get anybody to come and check the pool because all of the commercial people were maxed out and didn't have time for us. And I couldn't talk any of my residential pool friends into coming out and checking it out. So we did later have some issues with the pool that we might have been able to circumvent had someone actually came out and looked at it. But again, smaller town, and sometimes it's just tough. So that was another thing we had, but really with the rest of the due diligence, it went really fast because we had to do it in like a week. And so we did almost everything except for the pool. And then we needed to get a video on one more drain line. But really there was nothing that was too big of a surprise or nothing that we couldn't figure out how to handle.
So
it really went pretty well.
From a timeline perspective, that's one thing we didn't really talk about just yet. Whenever you made that initial or that kind of got the final offer accepted of the $5 million, which is roughly about $69,500 per unit in the purchase price, you had the $100,000 of earnest money deposit. What kind of a timeline did you give yourself to be able to get this one to the finish line? Was it 30 days due diligence, 45, and did you give yourself 30 after that, or kind of what was the setup?
So we went under contract in August, and with the 100,000 hard day one, it really didn't matter what we found in due diligence, to be honest. So long as it was less than $100,000 to fix, it really didn't matter.
Yeah.
I want to say we had 14 days of due diligence. It was insane.
Wow.
We had hoped to get closed I want to say it was October, and that date kind of came and went because we couldn't find an acceptable loan product. And so at that point, the second team was getting really antsy. And that's one of the things, like I talk to people all the time, when you're trying to figure out your team members, you really need to try and figure out people's risk tolerances. But really, you don't know what your risk tolerance is until you're in that kind of a situation. Yep. So I don't know how you figure it out ahead of time. But they just got really rough. I want to say we looked at 12 or 15 loan products before the day that call number 16 dropped everything he was doing and helped us get a loan product.
So I want to unpack something that you just mentioned here, which I think is very impactful for many people. But before I do, it has to do with the risk tolerances. But before I do, so we had the 14 days due diligence, and then was it like another 30 days to close, or kind of, and then like another option for extensions for another 30 days, or how did that work?
Okay, so we were supposed to close in October, at the end of October, and we had to pay for the extensions, of course. It was $75,000 for an extension to November and another $75,000 to extend out to the end of the year.
And that was all non-refundable.
It went toward the purchase price, but I believe it was non-refundable. Yes.
Yeah. Usually those extension additional monies are. Okay. And so let's go back and talk about these risk tolerances, because I think you bring up a good point of making sure that you find a partner that does have a certain risk tolerance. And if we go back to this particular acquisition that you had and that group that came along, that second group that ended up kind of blowing up, if you will, as well. But from the very beginning, I think you mentioned that you and your husband were the one that put up the 100,000. Is that correct? And, I look at this and I go, to really gauge somebody's risk tolerance, probably better have them put up some earnest money deposit too. Even if it's only 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever it is, it still needs to be a significant amount of money to them to be able to make sure that they can show you that we are here. We understand the risk tolerance here. And, I think one of the reasons why they might have stepped away is because they really had nothing to lose. And you were the only one that had something to lose. And then they felt bad making you be in that position. So that friendship or partnership or whatever is pretty much, shot in the barrel, if you will.
Yeah. But I will say that all of the guys that were on the second team invested in the deal.
Hmm.
They all became LPs.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's good. I mean, that's a good thing. What was the main impetus for them wanting to kind of not be part of the GP?
So honestly, we were all newbies. There was one experienced person on the team, and that person just kept saying, it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. And Jason and I were on the phone almost daily with our coach. We were on the phone with Joe, and Joe was actually selling something where pretty much the same thing was happening. And he was like, this is absolutely the way it goes. And you're not abnormal. This is not abnormal. This is fine. And so we went back to the team, and I wasn't trying to be mean. I really wasn't. That was not my goal. But I was like, this person is saying this is abnormal, but this person has what, 100 million maybe in assets under management. Our coach has $1 billion in assets under management and says this is absolutely normal. And we're going to get this thing across the finish line. But we had never gotten a deal across the finish line. And so it didn't matter how many times I said, man, we're going to get this thing across the finish line. Until we did, they really had no reason to believe us.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Unfortunate,
Yeah.
but it's true.
Well, I mean, it's a great point to bring up. I mean, if you learn, not you, I mean, you obviously, but if any of the listeners who are listening learn anything from this episode, is making sure that the partners that you are bringing on from a GP perspective have similar risk tolerances as you. And one of the ways as a kind of litmus test of that is, hey, on this next deal, we're going to put up 100,000. We're going to split it up however many ways it is. And that's actually, how Danny, Brandon, and myself at passiveinvesting.com have done it from the very beginning. If we've said we're all liable, like if something happens, all three of us are going to split whatever it is 3 ways, and we're all going to be, hurting in the pocket, if you will. And, thankfully up to this point, we have never lost any of our earnest money deposit. And since the last time you heard me talk about the 1 million earnest money, we've had it up to 6 million at one point on a deal.
No way.
Yeah. So we've definitely been able to step it up a little bit there, but and get some deals awarded to us that wouldn't normally be awarded. We've closed 2 deals that are, we've closed one deal that was 96 million, I believe, maybe 97, and then another one that was 109. Right. And
Wow.
So when you get to those larger numbers like that, you got to put up some big money to let people know that you're very confident that you can close those big projects like that. But at the same time, we split it up 3 ways. So like we all 3 have that ability to have that risk tolerance, and you have to make sure you find partners that, number one, have the ability to lose that kind of money and still be okay with it. Right. Not that anybody ever wants to lose that kind of money, but you can't be partners with somebody who, if they lose that significant amount of money, that it will ruin them, right? You don't want to be in that kind of a position. That's a bad position to be in. So definitely checking the risk tolerances of the people that you are partners with. Because one of the things I always talk about with partners is making sure that you find somebody that has a complementary skill set than you. Don't try to get into business with somebody. If you like underwriting, they like underwriting. It's a recipe for disaster, right? You could be friends and you can have phone calls to discuss underwriting, but don't get into business together. You want to find somebody who, like, maybe you're really good at underwriting and spreadsheets, and you need to find somebody else to do your investor relations piece and talking with brokers and acquisitions and the finance side of things. So there's a great balance that can be had when it comes to multiple partners. And I honestly believe we wouldn't be where we are today if it weren't for the 3 managing partners and our complementary skill sets that we provide to passiveinvesting.com and our investors as we continue to acquire assets down the line.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. We'll never do 100% of the risk capital again.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. Unless it's just you and your husband on the deal and that's it, that's
Well,
one thing.
yeah.
But I mean, and you'll get to that point where you'll be like, I don't really need anybody else to help me anymore. I just want to be able to do my own projects, and you'll be happy with that. Right. And it's one of those things that you just have to make those decisions as you kind of go throughout time, as you continue to grow your group.
Yeah.
Yep.
But no, and there was one guy that really, he put up all the money for everything in the due diligence process. So he was willing to step away and lose that, because when he left the second team, that was what he said is, I'm willing to walk away and lose that. When we put together the third team, which is the team that got it across the finish line, we actually all agreed to pay him back his money.
Yeah.
But it was just, we got a lot of respect getting that across the finish line, because we went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We went through 7 GPs before finally landing on the team that we all got it across the finish line.
Wow. So started this thing under contract in August and then closed it, just before the week before Christmas, basically. So I remember that December 17th last year, because there was a lot of deals that were trying to get closed before that next week, which was the week of Christmas, and everybody's pretty much shutting down. So
yeah, no, it was insane. And so the people that were doing our loan, they kept saying, well, how much have you raised? And we were like, oh yeah, 20%. Oh yeah, 30%. We had about $250,000, and it was all from Jason's family.
what was the total raise amount?
It was 1.8 or 1.9.
Okay.
And so when the second team dissolved, of course, we got to call 16. Now we had a loan product. And so I had already reached out to my friend Frank Padalano, who I met. Well, we met face to face in 2020 at Keystone. But he and I had been chatting a lot before that, because he used to be a middle school teacher. And I was having a ton of issues with my admin. And so I would text him at like 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. I'm like, I'm dying here. I can't go. I don't want to teach tomorrow. Don't tell me I don't have to teach tomorrow. He's like, Angel, it's almost the end of the year. You're going to be fine. But he would like talk me off the ledge. Right. And so then when we met face to face, he was like, oh my gosh, wow, this is awesome. And he was the one I called up and was like, hey, Frank, we need some help. Can you help us potentially raise capital and be a part of the GP team? Because you have to have an active role. And that was before the second team had dissolved. So when the second team dissolved, I called him back. I'm like, so you want to just be a member of the GP team? And so he came on. And then my friend Mike Colderay, who I had been introduced to through Megan Lamke, he came on. And then Gail McCarthy came on. And so now we had a team, and we just started raising capital. And we had put them off so much with, can we see your bank account? We need to see your bank account. That by the time we finally showed them the bank account, we had like I want to say we had 1.4 or 1.5 in there. And Frank, who is amazing, put in enough money to get us across the finish line at that point.
That's good.
And we just backfilled him. And so at the end of the day, Jason and I raised about $1 million on our first raise.
That's exciting. How does it feel?
I
know it was stressful, but
well, it's pretty cool to say, because since we didn't go through agency, we basically sponsored our own first deal. And there's not a whole ton of people out there that can say that. And then to be able to back it up with, we raised about $1 million on our first raise. And so I have a lot of friends that invest passively in a lot of deals, and they always give me the same shocked look, like, how in the world did you get any investors at all? And I'm like, I don't know.
Well, and it seems to me like what I'm seeing with you and Angel is the persistence, right? I know you had reached out to me about this project. We kind of talked about it a little bit, and your persistence, I think, is what paid off in the end. Is just sticking with it, continuing to make those phone calls, because you're right. It takes phone calls, it takes interactions, and it takes communication to be able to get a deal like this across the finish line. And at the end of the day, you have some great investors that are now invested with you, and now you can be able to prove yourself to these investors. And then your next project and your next deal will just get even easier and easier.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the goal. And the other thing I always kind of stress here too is, like, people are like, oh my God, you raised $1 million. Like, yeah, it's not that crazy. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, that's 17 investors. Because I think people, when you hear $1 million, like, that's like 100 people. No, literally 17, and we're one of the 17. So when you think about it that way, that's not that much. That's not that many people. And I think that's probably why you'll hear tons of coaches say you need a list of 100. because it just doesn't take that many people to raise $1 million from.
Now, what was I just had a question to ask you. How much did you need to raise to kind of get it through the finish line? Because I know you had some CapEx dollars that, was probably part of the loan, but also some operating reserves. So even though you were raising a 1.8 million or so, you probably didn't need the full 1.8 to close.
So on the day we closed, I want to say, I think it was 1.6 was what we had to have. And on that day, Frank also wired some money in just in case for incidentals. So Frank was amazing. And we will forever be indebted to Frank because without him, I don't know. I don't know if we would have gotten it across the finish line, because the seller was beginning to get a little frustrated. And, we're talking to Dugan, we're talking to everybody. And I'll never forget Dugan telling me, at the end of the day, nobody's going to care how stressed out you are, or that you're having a nervous breakdown or any of that. They're going to care about, did you close or not?
Yep.
And so just hearing that and just being like, oh my God. And just realizing it just kind of turned it around for me. But I still don't know that if Frank hadn't been there, maybe, I don't know, because I don't know that the seller would have continued to wait for us.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time too, like we looked at assumption, we looked at all of these different options, and we were looking at a February or March 22 close. And so when we were able to find something that from approval to close was 28 days, it was like, heck yeah.
Done. Well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, your persistence of making those phone calls, and people have to take away from this episode that, what, sometimes you have to just buckle down, make those phone calls, and find yourself a Frank.
Yeah, well, it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was uncomfortable. It was real uncomfortable. And Jason was pushing me. And it was one of those times where it was like, we work together as spouses, but we're also team members, we're teammates.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would hang up the phone. He's like, okay, who you calling next? And I'd hang up the phone. Okay, who you calling next? And he told me later, he's like, I really don't like pushing you like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, very uncomfortable. Yeah. But he did it. He got uncomfortable because he doesn't like pushing me like that. And I got uncomfortable making all those phone calls. Mm-hmm. But it worked. And that's ultimately one of the reasons why this thing got across the finish line.
Well, I will say it does get easier, because I do remember my very first deal that we did on our own, and we were raising $2.5 million for that one. And that was some of the hardest $2.5 million I've ever raised. But then since then, it gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And you'll find that as you continue to close more projects, that the equity does come in a lot faster, and it is a lot easier to bring it in.
Well, thank you, because I need to hear that.
I know some people do a deal like this, like you just went through, and you're like, I'm done. That's it. I'll do my one deal, cash in, and I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. And people do that all the time, but it's one of those things you just got to dust yourself off and get back up, find the next deal, and do it again and again and again. And put your eye on the prize of being able to really impact people that don't have the ability to go find these projects, and you're the person that's getting paid to be able to do that for them, so they don't have that fear of missing out, of that FOMO of, just putting their money in the stock market. And because right now, right now we're in August of 2022. This year, the stock market has seen about a 15 to 20% loss since the beginning of the year. So people are looking at their portfolios and seeing that they lost 20%. Instead of putting it in real estate and realizing that they gained 20%, right? Because I'm sure people that have invested in your project, even at this point, even though it's only 8 months down the road, they're already in a positive position, because you've been able to go in there and implement some changes, reduce expenses, increase the income, increase the rents, and have improved their bottom line, right? Obviously, they might not see it for a few more years until you eventually sell, but it's definitely something that you as the operator have to continue to think about the investors and the impact that you're going to have on the lives of those investors, and how you can continue to do that for multiple generations.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of one of the beauties too, is we've invested in this market on the residential side for 15 years. So we really know the market, and I know that it's a little bit harder to push rents here. And so I was constantly thinking of what are the additional streams of income we can create? And so even, especially in the current economic situation that we're in now, as people lose the ability to cover those housing dollars, what can we continue to do to produce income for the property?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the idea on having the covered parking comes in, and then creating a nicer environment for the residents in the clubhouse. And on July 4th weekend, we got a bounce house and a big water slide, and just doing things to try and increase that welcome feeling, so people are less likely to want to leave, because really that's an income stream too.
Yep.
Even though it's not a cash outflow, if they move out, it becomes a cash outflow. And so by them not moving, it keeps money from going out, which is a net income.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I don't know, we've just been trying all sorts of things, and I'm really glad it's only 15 minutes from my house.
Well, speaking of being only 15 minutes from your house, I'm sure we were talking in the green room about the property management and some of the woes you've had over that the last couple of months. But let's talk about it from the very beginning, and then we can dive into some of the issues you've had. But what was the plan for property management from the very beginning?
So we're using third-party management. Even with our singles and our residential stuff, we've got property managers. I watched my grandparents self-manage their properties, and I promised myself that I would never be 70 years old shuffling from property to property to collect rent.
Mm-hmm.
That was never something I wanted to do. And then Jason saw his family doing it a little bit differently. They had about 70 units of residential multifamily and never wanted to do the self-management. So they always had property managers as well. So even from day one, when we started with singles, we've had property managers. And so we knew we were going to have a property management company, and we signed all those papers and met everybody, met the regional, met the on-site people, and it was great. And everything was moving smooth. Rents were bumping, delinquencies were going down. I mean, everything looked amazing. And it was really going great until like the beginning of, well, I guess 2 weeks into July. And that was when we got the phone call that was like, hey, this company's dissolving in 2 weeks.
That's when the shiznit hit the fan.
Again. And the part about it is the new company coming in was going to take us on. They were going to pull in the whole Wichita Falls portfolio that this company had. And we are like, okay, so it's not really that big of a deal. It's all going to be smooth. And then we got an email. I guess Jason was already gone. So Jason was on his way to Philmont with our oldest daughter, where they would have no cell phone or internet access. So I'm doing this on my own. We got the email that said, hey, I know we said we were going to take you, but we've made the decision not to take you. And so it was like, oh, what are we going to do now? Which I'll still say that the account that company set up still has all our money in it, and we can't touch it. So my words of wisdom here are: create another operational account, find out what the buffer amount has to be in that property management account, their operational account, and whatever the buffer is, that's all you keep in there. And every 2 weeks, every month, tell them in writing, hey, I want XYZ amount transferred to this account, because we've got $108,000 now that we can't touch.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucks. And I don't know when we're going to be able to get it. That we created this other account for it to go into, but it's not going there. And so it was, yeah.
No, that's a good point. We don't really talk about that as much as we probably should. But you know, we with our group, we've always had two accounts. So the property manager has their account, and we'll only put money in there that they need to be able to have access to, whether it be deposit money for, you know, the lease deposits, or, you know, some of the buffer, if you will, for operating reserves or expenses and things like that. And anything else, we always have a separate bank and separate bank account that the money goes into, that we have full control over. I'm surprised though that they won't let you have access to that, because any account that they set up for us, we're signers on and have access to it as well, which is kind of interesting the way they set that up on your
No,
side.
we're not signers, we're only viewers, but the bank doesn't know we're viewers, so we can't even view it when we're in the bank.
Interesting.
Yeah, but we didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. And I will never not read a management agreement line by line ever again. And I'll probably never sign another contract without redlining.
Did on this particular one, Did, does the state of Texas, do they have licensure for property managers?
We came across this. I don't believe they do.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking that is I would research that, because that seems to me like it would be an issue that you could bring up with the board or something like that, to have them try to expedite that process for you. I mean, obviously you probably have, legal team on your side that you're discussing this with, and they're probably giving you some ideas as well. But that's just something that came to my head of like trying to, put the hot iron underneath them a little bit for them to act a little bit faster so you can get access to those funds.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the issue too is that that property management company is no more.
Yeah.
I think the treasury is still on staff and maybe a couple of other people,
Hmm.
but as of August 14th, everybody's done.
Yeah.
So I guess we have to have it by August 14th. But even then, just not having access to those funds is really frustrating. And that was why I was like looking so hard at the property management agreement and seeing where it had that buffer amount, and you have to request it in writing. And I'm like, and we need to have that on the calendar so that we do it. But like
Sounds like you might need to talk to Frank a little bit. Maybe he can
maybe he can help
sick them on
expedite
it.
this thing. But they were saying that the reason why they do it that way is because they don't want owners going in and taking money out of the account and then them not being able to cover what they need to cover.
Mhm.
So, which I get that, but at the same time,
It's
I'm
the owner's account
publicly,
anyway. Like you're
it
using the
is.
owner's funds. So
And when I was in the bank, Jason and I were in the bank yesterday, and I'm like, this is our money. This is the money we have to run this facility. We
yeah.
can't run the apartments if we don't have our money to run the apartments with.
Hmm.
And she was like, my hands are tied. There's really nothing I can do.
That's awful. Well,
Yep.
I hope you can work through that. That's definitely a challenging piece to it. Second or third challenging piece to this puzzle. But
Yeah.
it sounds like you guys are doing the right thing and are on the right track to kind of right the ship, if you will. But
Yes.
overall, I mean, has the property been performing the way you had expected?
It has been. Expenses are high. We're all bills paid.
Hmm.
And so expenses are high right now. And we're working on that. We're trying to figure out a way to do like wind energy or something. Everyone keeps screaming solar, but again, the hell, it's really bad.
Damages those
And
panels.
yeah, but they're like, oh, well, it's a protective coating. They just come out and replace the plexiglass or whatever it is over it. And I just keep looking at them like, are you following me on how big the hell gets? I don't think we're on the same page here.
Mhm.
But yeah, and then some other people were like, well, you're not gonna be able to get a big windmill. I'm like, I'm not asking for a big windmill. I'm asking for a residential windmill that can cut it down just a little bit.
Mhm.
So we'll see what happens. We're working on it. We're not gonna leave any stone unturned, I suppose. I've even looked at like the hydro propellers that
Mhm.
go on the intake up at the front of the property, because even if it only powers the leasing office and the clubhouse, that's at least a little bit less.
Yeah. Let's talk about the financing perspective here, because I know we talked about some of the different nuances, but what was the kind of final terms that you were able to negotiate on the debt on this asset?
All right. So we wound up with a bridge loan.
Hmm.
And at the time it felt so expensive, but we got closed in 28 days. So it was like, well, what's the trade-off here?
Yeah.
We wound up at 5.99, 2 years IO, and then two more additional 1 year add-ons, still at 5.99. And both of those additional add-ons with IO only as well.
Okay. And what was so it was a 4-year term, right? 211.
Mhm.
Okay, 211 there. And uh, what was the loan to value?
They covered 100% of the CapEx,
Okay.
and it was 70% LTV, I believe.
Okay. So that's not bad.
Maybe
Uh,
75, but I think it was 70.
yeah, like a 75 loan to cost or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Good. Well, I have two final questions for you, Angel, as we're wrapping up the episode here. I asked these two final questions to every guest. They're contrasting questions. The first one is what would you say was easier, if you could say anything, it was easier. What could you say was easier that maybe in the beginning you thought was going to be a little bit more challenging?
Creating GP teams.
Yeah.
I mean, because we had to go through, we had to create 3 of them. And I don't know, that was easier than I thought it was going to be, because I really
Mhm.
thought we had to get skill sets and find out what was going to work and all this stuff. And I think it was really my own naivety that in some of the, the first iterations, I wasn't thinking so much about what can this person bring to the table.
Mhm.
Um, what is this person going to run on? What is going to freak this person out? And I might even go so far as to say, like, in the future, I'm going to deal with more military people because they can deal with all sorts of stuff going on, which I'm always asking my military friends, what's their magic sauce? Like, how do you deal with constantly changing situations? Because there's got to be some magic sauce there that they just don't realize is magic.
Yeah. The last question is the opposite of that. What did you find was more challenging that maybe originally you thought was going to be a little bit more of a walk in the park?
Oh, raising capital.
Yeah. Would you say that the raising, I mean, I think both you're on your side, the debt piece, but also the raising capital, but between those two, would you still say raising capital was the more challenging piece?
Once we had traction,
Yeah.
it went really quickly.
Yeah.
But like building traction and getting moving,
Hmm.
it felt so hard. And I was using all these tricks that people had given me. Nothing was working. And so we were really stuck after we talked to family and friends.
Hmm.
And so pushing beyond that, and that was a lot of that was Frank. Frank is really good at motivating me. I don't know if it's because we were both teachers or what. And maybe I motivate like a middle school girl. I don't know. But when it became like a competition between the two of us, it was a lot faster because it was almost game like.
Hmm.
Even though it's not game like at all, it still kind of felt that way. And
Sure.
so at that point, we started picking up momentum because we had traction and we were no longer spinning our wheels, because there was a day where I had 16 no's in a row and I was like, I just can't make any more calls. I just can't. Or it might have been 18. It was a lot. It was like 3 or 4 hours of calls. And I was just like, I have to stop. I can't keep going today.
Hmm. Had to be
And
done.
we had multiple days of that.
Hmm.
And so it was just super, super hard. And you may think that you've got a million relationships and it's going to be super easy, and if it is super easy, man, kudos to you. But if it's not, it really has nothing to do with you. It's a timing issue. It's a liquidity issue. It can be a million other things, but it's most likely not you.
Good advice there. Well, Angel, how can the listeners reach out to you if they have further questions for you about this particular acquisition, or maybe they want to continue to follow you further?
So on LinkedIn, I'm Angel Williams. And I do try to answer all of my own DMs. I do have a little help, but she's really good about letting me know, hey, you need to get on this conversation. Because I never want to run into somebody somewhere and then be like, hey, remember we were talking about XYZ? And I'm like, oh, deer in the headlights. I always want to make sure that I know what's going on with
Hmm.
with the people that I talk to, and people that are potentially reaching out to me. We also have www.theacademypresents.com. It's a little wonky. It's a little slow right now. So that may not be the best. If you go to any virtual meetups, I always put my stuff in the chat. We've got a Marvelous Mondays meetup every Monday. It's a lot of fun. And we do 2 virtual summits every year, because in March of 2020, someone led me to believe that it was just about, getting people together and figuring out how to make it all match up. Dan, it was just, well, your words, it's just coordinating people.
It's just playing the chess maker.
Yeah, it's not, by the way.
Well,
But if I hadn't done that one, we wouldn't have our 6th one coming up in September either.
that's cool. That's cool to have that.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Angel, for spending some time with us here. I know we've learned quite a few different things about this particular acquisition that you've had here, and exciting to see this one go through. And looking forward to continue to follow you as you close more deals and have you on as a guest as a future episode.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Angel.
All right. Bye.